What's up, world? It's DIY whiteboard time. This is all we need. Let's get to work.
The centerpiece of this project is a piece of glass. I had this one sitting around the shop already, but you can pick up a 16 by 20 piece from the home store for about $5. To create the whiteboard, you need to paint one side of your pane of glass a solid color. I went with white because it is in the name, but any light color will work. Just make sure you put 2 even coats on. It's best to cover that with a clear coat to keep the white paint from chipping. If you just needed a real simple whiteboard, you could stop right there, but I'm going to fancy it up with a frame. I'm going to be fancy and use cherry for my frame, but some 1x2s from the home store would work just the same. I'm using my table saw to break down this larger beam into the 4 smaller pieces for the outside of the frame. Pop the circuit again. With the 4 frame pieces milled up, I like to mark the outside edge before I take it to the router. Routing an edge detail is definitely not necessary, but you can never go wrong with a nice chamfer. So sexy. Team chamfer all the way. I couldn't decide if I wanted my edge detail on the inside or the outside of the frame, so I laid it out to see what looked best. Inside for sure. Next, we need to cut a dado in all 4 sides of our frame in order to accept the glass. I used my dado stack for this, but you could easily take multiple passes with a standard blade to achieve the same effect. When cutting your dado, be sure to use a feather board to keep your workpiece tight against the fence. And be sure you keep even downward pressure throughout the entire cut. Now let's jump into our miters. I like to mark out the angle of my miters before I take it to the saw. I learned this the hard way, so you don't have to. I set my miter gauge to 45 degrees and cut the first 2 miters. Ooh, can't argue with that. I took advantage of the painted side of the glass by marking out where the inside corners of my miters met. By doing this on all 4 corners, I was able to use relative measurements to determine the inside lengths of each one of my boards. And then it was just as simple as setting my board against the glass and marking exactly where my miter needed to go. Take it to the saw, and then we're off to the races. With all 4 miters cut, we're ready to dry fit it and see how it looks. Not too shabby if you ask me. Let's pop it back apart and assemble it for real. We're going to put a small bead of caulk inside the dado all the way around our frame to keep our glass from sliding around after final assembly. Once we have caulk on all 4 sides, we'll slide the 2 end panels on before we put a thin layer of wood glue on all 4 miters. Don't go crazy with your glue. A little goes a long way. The easiest way to clamp up this frame is using a simple ratchet clamp. After letting it dry for a couple hours, the strap comes off and we're ready to sand. In order to protect the glass during sanding and finishing, I put a layer of painter's tape on the face to keep it safe. I sanded both sides of the frame up to 220 grit for a nice smooth finish. I used my Gator 220 micro zip to sand the hard to reach places like the inside corners and chamfers. When finishing on a budget, mineral oil is a great option. It's not the most durable finish, but it really makes the wood pop and it can be reapplied over time. I wanted a slightly more durable finish on my whiteboard since I'll be keeping it in the shop. I tested out a couple different types of finishes, including lacquer, shellac, and Maker brand simple finish. I ended up going with the simple finish because I just love the look of it on this cherry.
And there you have it, DIY whiteboard. Go check out some of my other videos, and as always, it's your turn. Go build stuff.